I did it. I finally did it, and I'm not sure if I feel proud or ashamed, but I know I'd do it again. My nephew stood in my living room and told me the bank was weak. I'm Robert, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing that grin I hadn't seen since he was 12 years old and had just scored his first touchdown at Little League football. I knew something was different the moment he walked through the door. He didn't drop his keys on the counter the way he usually does, didn't kick off his boots without untying them first. He set everything down carefully, like he was trying to hold himself together just long enough to say what he needed to say. "Dad," he said. I asked her, she said yes. I put down the dish towel I'd been using and looked at my son. 31 years old, 6'2", built like his grandfather, and I saw nothing but pure joy on his face. The kind of joy you can't fake, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep it almost hurts to look at. I pulled him into a hug and told him I was happy for him. I meant it. At that moment, I truly meant every word. Her name was Cassidy. He'd met her 8 months earlier at a conference in Phoenix, the kind of corporate networking event he always complained about but attended anyway because his company required it. She worked in marketing for a real estate firm. She was 34, polished, quick with a smile, and she had a way of entering a room like she'd already decided it belonged to her. My son was completely, helplessly in love with her. I first met her the following weekend when my son brought her over for dinner. I'd spent most of the afternoon in the kitchen. I make a slow-cooked beef stew when I want to impress. My late wife's recipe, though I've never told anyone that. It takes almost 4 hours, and the whole house fills with the smell of it. I set the table with the good plates, the ones we only brought out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I wanted her to feel welcome. She arrived wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and she complimented my house the way people do when they're trying to be polite without actually saying anything. Charming, she called it. I smiled and thanked her. I poured wine. I asked questions. She answered them smoothly like someone who'd rehearsed, and not a single answer told me anything real about who she was. My son was too in love to notice, but I noticed. There was a moment during dinner. I almost missed it, when my son went to the kitchen to refill the bread basket and Cassidy didn't realize I was still watching her. She glanced around the dining room slowly, taking inventory. Not the way a guest admires a home, the way a buyer assesses a property. Her eyes moved from the fireplace to the built-in bookshelves to the window that looks out over the half-acre backyard. Then she noticed me watching and her smile came back like a light switch. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that's what fathers do. They look for reasons not to trust the woman their son loves, because no one is ever quite good enough. My wife used to tease me about it. She'd say, "Harold, you'd find fault with a sunrise." She wasn't wrong. So I pushed the feeling down and cleared the plates and served the apple pie I'd made from scratch, and Cassidy said it was delicious, and I thanked her again. But I couldn't stop thinking about that look. Over the next few months, I saw them regularly. Sunday dinners mostly. Cassidy got more comfortable around me, which should have been a good thing. Instead, it made certain things harder to ignore. The way she steered conversation away from her family. Every time I asked about her parents or where she grew up, she'd redirect, pivot, change the subject so smoothly you almost didn't catch it. The way she talked about money, not as a means to something, but as the point of everything. The way she'd sometimes say "we" when talking about the future. When we have a house like this. When we have property like yours. And look at my son in a way that made me feel like she was doing math I wasn't supposed to see. One Sunday in February, I was in the backyard filling the bird feeder when I heard her voice coming through the kitchen window. She was on the phone. My son's truck wasn't in the driveway. He'd run to the hardware store, and she didn't know I was outside. I wasn't trying to listen, but sound carries differently in winter, and I heard her clearly. "It's only a matter of time," she was saying. "The lot alone is worth at least $400. The house needs work, but that's fine. Once we're married, it's different. Everything's different." Pause. No, he's not the problem. The old man is easy. He wants his son to be happy. That's all these types ever want. I stood there with birdseed in my hand and let her words settle over me like cold water. I went inside through the back door, hung up my coat, and started washing my hands at the kitchen sink. Cassidy was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, the call already over. She looked up and smiled at me. "Need any help with dinner?" she asked. "No," I said. "I've got it." I didn't say anything to my son that night. I went to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling for a long time, going over what I'd heard, turning it over, looking for the way to interpret it that made her innocent. I couldn't find one. I also knew that if I walked up to my son right then and said, "I heard your fiancée on the phone and I think she's after your inheritance," he would not believe me. I know my son. He would have heard an old man who was scared of losing his place in his son's life. He would have pulled away. He might never have forgiven me. And Cassidy, I was certain of this, would have used it against me for years. So I decided to wait and to watch and to be sure. Over the next 2 months, I paid closer attention. I noticed that Cassidy had started asking my son specific questions about the property, whether I'd ever talked about selling, whether I had a will, whether the house was in my name alone, or whether my son was on the deed. My son, who is the most trusting person I've ever known, answered all of it openly. He thought she was just being practical, planning for the future. She told him that's what it was. I contacted a real estate attorney I'd used years earlier, a straightforward woman named Patricia who had handled my property documents when I first bought the house. I didn't tell her everything. I just asked some questions about how property transfers work in our state, what protections exist, what someone would need to make a claim on inherited property. I left that meeting feeling like I needed to update some documents, which I did. Then I made a few calls to people I trusted, old friends, a couple of colleagues. I did not make a scene. I did not confront Cassidy. I waited. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in May at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside of town. My son had asked me to give a toast. I'd been working on what I wanted to say for weeks, writing drafts on the notepad I keep by the kitchen phone, crossing things out, starting over. I wanted to say something true. I wanted to give him something real to carry into this marriage. 3 days before the wedding, Cassidy and I ended up alone together for about 20 minutes while my son was on a call with his best man. We sat in the living room with cups of coffee, and I tried one more time to have a real conversation with her. I asked her what she was most looking forward to about the next chapter of their lives. She said, stability, building something that lasts. I asked, what does that look like to you? She said, security, having things that are yours that no one can take from you. I looked at her and said, I think that's very important. She smiled and said she was glad I understood. I understood completely. The wedding day was a Saturday, cool and overcast, the kind of spring morning that can't make up its mind. The vineyard was beautiful. Old stone building, long wooden tables, white flowers everywhere. My nephew stood in my living room in the swore room that told me the number in the swore clothes next to me than on my house. And to take a moment because he looked exactly like his mother. The same calm, the same steadiness. She would have been so proud of him. The ceremony was simple and lovely, and I sat in the front row and watched my son marry a woman I believed was going to hollow him out. I kept my face still. I held my hat in my hands. When they were pronounced married, I clapped. I hugged my son. I shook Cassidy's hand and said, "Welcome to the family." During the reception, the toasts were given before dinner. The best man went first, short, funny, the kind of speech that makes the whole room laugh and then feel warm. Then came my turn. I stood up and picked up my glass. The tent went quiet. My son was looking at me with that same expression he used to have as a kid when I was about to tell him something he didn't already know. I started the way I'd planned. I talked about my wife, how she'd raised our son to be honest, how she'd always said that the most important thing in a marriage was knowing exactly who you were marrying. The room was quiet and attentive. People were smiling. Cassidy was smiling. Then I paused. And I said, I want to make sure my son knows exactly who he's marrying. The smile flickered. 3 months ago, I said, keeping my voice steady, I overheard a phone conversation. I don't think it was meant for me, but I heard it. And because I love my son more than I care about anyone's comfort, including my own, I need him to know what was said. The room went very still. I repeated what I'd heard, not angrily, not dramatically, just clearly. The lot. The 400,000. The part about the old man being easy. I heard someone draw a sharp breath. I saw Cassidy's face go from pale to red in the span of about 4 seconds. My nephew just looked at her. He didn't say anything. Cassidy stood up and said very quietly, that's not what it sounded like. I said, I heard every word. She looked around the room, at her own guests, at her parents sitting to the right, at the wedding planner standing near the tent entrance, and I think she was calculating the way she always calculated, looking for the play that would work. But there was no play. There was just a room full of people who had all heard the same thing all at once. Her mother put her face in her hands. My nephew stood in my living room at Sturgeon my house next week. I'm Robert. Don't raise it then. He said her name, just her name, and the way he said it told me everything I needed to know about what he now understood. What I haven't told yet is this. The phone call I'd made that morning before leaving for the vineyard had been to a colleague of mine from my former company, a man who'd done some research I'd asked for, quietly and carefully over the past several weeks. He'd found records, business filings mostly, from 2 other states. Cassidy had been engaged before twice, and in both cases there had been disputes over property and financial assets following the dissolution of the relationship. One case had involved a formal complaint that was later settled out of court. None of this was secret information. It was all a matter of public record. But no one had known to look. I had a folder. I brought it to the wedding in my jacket pocket. I set it on the table. I didn't come here to cause pain, I said. I came here because my son deserves to walk into the rest of his life with his eyes open. Cassidy looked at the folder and didn't touch it. My son picked it up. The tent was completely silent except for the wind moving through the sides of the structure and, somewhere in the back, a baby fussing in someone's arms. My son stood there reading for what felt like a long time. Then he closed the folder and set it back on the table and turned to Cassidy and said the only thing left to say, I need you to leave. She didn't argue. Whatever calculation she'd been running had finally produced a result she couldn't work around. She picked up her clutch from the table. Her mother got up to follow her. Her father stayed in his seat with his arms folded, staring at the tablecloth, and I felt a strange sympathy for him that I hadn't expected. After they were gone, the tent was quiet for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then my son's best man stood up and said in a voice that broke the tension like a window breaking, Well, I did not have this on my bingo card. And somehow, improbably, a few people laughed. The release of something that had been held too tight for too long. My son sat back down. He poured himself a glass of water and drank the whole thing. Then he looked at me across the table. How long have you known? He asked. Long enough, I said. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I told him the truth. I said, because you wouldn't have believed me, and I needed you to see it yourself. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and I could see him working through it, the grief and the relief and the anger all arriving at the same time, sorting themselves out, finding their places. I'm sorry, he said. You don't have anything to be sorry for, I said. I should have listened to my gut, he said. I told him that his gut had never been the problem. His heart was too open. His mother had the same thing. It wasn't a flaw. It was just something you had to learn to protect. He was quiet again for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, Stay and eat with me, Dad. So I did. We sat at the head table at a vineyard in May with half a wedding's worth of food and a room full of people who were all very carefully deciding to talk about anything else. and we ate together, and I told him things about his mother that I'd been saving up for years, stories I had never found the right moment to share, and he laughed at the ones that were funny and sat quietly through the ones that weren't, and it was, in the strange arithmetic of hard days, one of the better evenings I can remember. I don't know what happens next for him. He'll be all right. I know that the way I know certain things that don't require explanation. He'll take some time. He'll be angry and sad in the right order or the wrong order, because grief never lines up the way we plan for it. And then one day he'll meet someone and it'll be real and he'll know the difference. I drove home alone that night through the county roads, past the farms and the gas stations and the grain elevators that haven't changed in 40 years. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a little while before going inside. The house was quiet. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard, at the dark shape of the old oak tree I've been meaning to trim since last fall. I don't regret what I did. I've asked myself that question every single day since, and the answer is always the same. A father's job isn't to make everything easy. It's to make sure his child can see clearly when it counts. My son looked at me across that table tonight, and there was nothing between us. No secrets, no held-back truths, no careful managing of what I allowed him to know. Just the two of us, the way it was when he was small, the way I'd always hoped it could stay. I finished my tea. I rinsed the cup, set it in the drying rack, turned off the kitchen light. He called me on his way home that night, just to say he'd gotten to his car okay, and he'd talk to me tomorrow. I said good night. I said I loved him. I went to bed, and for the first time in months, I slept without waking up at 3 a.m, with my mind already moving. Some things you carry quietly for a long time, and some things, when you finally set them down, turn out to have been exactly the right weight to carry, because they brought you exactly here, to this moment, to this result, to your son saying goodnight like it's just a regular evening and not the last night of a life he almost built with someone who never saw him at all. That was enough. That was more than enough. I keep coming back to one small moment. Not the tent, not the folder, not Cassidy picking up her clutch and walking out. I keep coming back to the bird feeder, standing in my own backyard in February with birdseed in my hand, hearing words through a kitchen window that rearranged everything I thought I knew about the months ahead. That was the moment everything changed, not because I did anything, but because I finally heard clearly what had been in front of me all along. There's a kind of cause and effect that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as punishment or reward. It just moves, quietly, through every choice a person makes, and eventually it lands somewhere. Cassidy made her choices. The calculated looks, the redirected conversations, the phone calls she didn't know I could hear. And each one of those choices built toward a single moment in a vineyard tent in May. Not because the universe was keeping score, because actions have weight. They accumulate, and sooner or later they come to rest somewhere real. What I had to wrestle with those long months between February and the wedding was my own part in it. Stand quiet is a choice, too. I chose to wait, to gather, to be certain before I said a word. Some people would call that cowardice. I call it the difference between being right and being useful. It would have felt good to confront her the day after that phone call. It would have accomplished nothing. My son wouldn't have believed me. Cassidy would have had months to reshape his version of events. I needed to be sure, and I needed him to see it himself with his own eyes, in a room full of people who all witnessed the same truth at the same time. That required patience. I'm not sure I naturally possess. I had to build it, day by day, choice by choice. That's what I want my son to carry from this. Not the anger, not the loss, but the understanding that doing right by someone you love sometimes means holding something difficult inside yourself for a very long time without letting it poison you. It means staying sharp when everything in you wants to react. It means gathering your facts, talking to the right people, updating your documents, making the quiet calls, not out of strategy, but out of care. Intelligence without character is just manipulation. Character without wisdom is just good intentions that keep getting outmaneuvered. You need all three working together, or you end up making the wrong move at the right time and losing everything you were trying to protect. My nephew stood in my living room at Reet. I'm Robert. On one May was an 8, Nace Dana was wild, and that's right and appropriate. But he has something now that Cassidy couldn't have taken from him even if everything else had gone her way. He has a father who didn't look away, who waited and watched and showed up at that wedding with something true in his pocket instead of something comfortable. We sat together at that table after she left, and we talked about his mother for the first time in years. Really talked, and I think that conversation was worth more than whatever Cassidy thought my lot was worth. That I didn't expect. That part surprised me.